Comrades and friends, I want to thank everybody for coming out to this very special day where we're commemorating 40 years of revolutionary struggle in the city of Detroit. When our branch was formed in 1970, the objective conditions in the world struggle were quite a bit different than they are today. It was a period when revolutionary movements were on the upsurge, and especially socialist movements were on the upsurge, particularly in the third world, in the oppressed nations. The Vietnamese people were in the process of defeating U.S. imperialism and were led by the Vietnamese Communist Party in that critical struggle. And in Asia, the struggle also spread into Cambodia and Laos, where the people also successfully liberated their countries from U.S. imperialism, and again led by communist movements in both of those countries. In Palestine, the Palestinian people, the struggle had emerged, and the PLO at that time was comprised of 5 organizations. One of them was Fatah, which was a bourgeois nationalist group, but the other 4 were all socialist organizations: the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Democratic Popular Front, all guided by Marxism and Leninism. Of course, China, the Chinese Revolution, was in its heyday, having just gone through the Cultural Revolution, which was a revolutionary development that's so vilified today, but was an attempt to continue the revolution even after the victory of the workers in the seizure of a workers' state. And the Cuban Revolution, of course, was also in its revolutionary heyday, and of course it's maintained its revolutionary vigor to today. Back in 1970, Cuba was in the midst of its 10 million ton harvest, where it was gathering 10 million tons to eliminate sugar, which had been the most oppressive job in Cuba. They turned it into a job where everyone participated from all over the world to gather that harvest in order for the Cuban Revolution to step forward and in order to mechanize the sugar production in Cuba. Because unlike in U.S. imperialism, the advent of technology liberates the people. It doesn't eliminate their jobs as it does here. And Cuba had people from all over the world coming there. And Cuba was not just, it was a beacon for the world struggle, as it has continued to be. It hosted the Tricontinental there. The Tricontinental was a congress of revolutionary Marxist organizations from Africa, Asia, and Latin America that would meet, and they put out tremendous publications, and it really was a period of revolutionary upturn. In Africa, the liberation movements in Angola and Guinea-Bissau and Mozambique, all led by Marxists, They were in the process of organizing armed struggles that eventually won their liberation from years of colonialism. And the ANC was also in the process of armed struggle against U.S. imperialism, against the apartheid regime, a regime funded and backed by the same corporations that oppress us every day. And the ANC was by and large led by communists and socialists. That movement was led by revolutionaries like ourselves. So this was a period of where revolution was on the agenda, and it penetrated the struggle in the U.S. as well, especially within the oppressed nations. And after years of civil rights demonstrations and kind of a nonviolent movement, the black liberation struggle had emerged by the late 60s and early 70s, and especially in the embodiment of the Black Panther Party, which was a Marxist-Leninist organization rooted in the black community and rooted in the fight for socialism and black liberation. And this movement, all of which were in many ways influenced by the world struggle, also took hold in the other oppressed nations as well. You had the Young Lords Party in the Puerto Rican nation, fighting for the liberation of Puerto Rico and fighting for liberation within this country, again led by Marxist-Leninists. You had the Black-Brown Berets in the Chicano movement. You had the Iroquois Coon in the Asian movement. You had the American Indian movement. In all of these movements, you had tremendous national liberation movements led by revolutionary and revolutionary socialists in every case. And the socialist movement, this revolutionary movement, also penetrated the youth as well in this country. Of course, there was a mass anti-war movement during that time, with huge demonstrations of 500,000 people. But at the same time, within the anti-war movement, while the dominant leadership of the anti-war movement was kind of a pacifist leadership, a bourgeois liberal leadership, within the youth movement, a revolutionary current also took hold. And it really took hold primarily through the development of SDS. And when people now, they give history of SDS, they make it sound like it was a group that was based on participatory democracy with Tom Hayden and people like that. But the SDS that we were part of in 1969-70 had nothing to do with that. That SDS was a revolutionary organization. It was based on overthrowing capitalism and imperialism and solidarizing itself with the oppressed. That was the SDS that we were part of. It was a revolutionary organization, and to be part of it means you had to be reading Marx and Lenin every day to just keep up with the revolutionary development and the struggle that was developing. The group of us that founded Workers' World Party were actually among the leadership of the SDS chapter at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, which was one of the largest SDS chapters. We were really the succeeders to the Weathermen, who had been the leadership the year before us. And we had a very large and very militant SDS chapter in Ann Arbor. We had blocks of people. We had cells in every single dormitory. And it was a lot different period than now. It was the ROTC that were on the defense of the year we led SDS. We must have taken over that ROTC building 5 or 6 times. One time we occupied it. Another time we just went in and smashed it to pieces. Another time we turned it into a daycare center, implementing the idea of making a peace, not war. And it was a militant, and the SDS was involved in supporting the black students who engaged in a tremendous struggle in Ann Arbor for affirmative action. It was very dynamic and very militant. They actually had to change the windows and the structure. They still have them now, from big windows in the buildings to these little windows, because we tore up those windows so many times, and we're very proud to say that. And that was the movement that bred us. But we also understood that as revolutionaries who were becoming Marxist-Leninists, that the struggle was not going to be on the campus, that it's only the working class that can overthrow capitalism. And so at the end of 1970, at the end of that year, we began meeting to move ourselves off of the campuses and into the working class struggle. And a group of 35 of us actually met together and made the decision to go to Detroit, which of course was a working class revolutionary center, and I'll talk more about that, and moved to Detroit. It became kind of the core for many of the revolutionary groups that ended up setting up in Detroit, not so much in the oppressed communities, but of organizers that went into the city to organize among the workers. And of that grouping, 6 of us, myself, Deb Roundtree, we're so glad that she's here today, Dave, Tova Fry, Chris Fry, Gene Bowdish, and Bill Sachs, our group came to Detroit as a collective, and after Deb went to a Workers' World Party conference, we decided to affiliate with Workers' World Party. Now, the reason we affiliated with Workers' World and the way we got to know Workers' World was in the streets. Because, as I said, there was a revolutionary youth movement, and in all the big anti-war demonstrations, there'd be like demonstrations literally of 500,000 people. There'd be anti-imperialist contingents that didn't just want to demonstrate peacefully and didn't want to limit the anti-war movement to a one-issue movement, but wanted to go there to confront the cops, to confront the state, to say that the war against, in solidarity with the Vietnamese people was also a war in solidarity with black America and for black liberation, that we couldn't separate these issues, they were one, and there'd be huge anti-imperialist contingents at all these demonstrations. And we would go, one year we went in, we just kind of trashed Washington during Nixon's inauguration. In 1970 we marched on the Justice Department, put an NLO flag on the Justice Department in solidarity. And these demonstrations were militant and confrontational. And the only Marxist party that was part of these demonstrations, that were with the youth in these demonstrations, was Workers' World Party through its youth arm, Youth Against War and Fascism. And YOF would be, because they were a party, because they were a Marxist-Leninist organization, they weren't just part of these contingents, they were the most organized grouping of the contingents. They had the best banners. They knew how to chant the most. They were in the middle of every fight with the cops. And we'd look at them and say, wow, this is the kind of people that we want to solidarize with. And we got to know the comrades in Workers' World. And especially, we appreciated the position of Workers' World, which was the one Marxist party, one of the more Marxist-Leninist party that put all its resources to defending the Black Panthers and defending the Black liberation struggle. And we made a decision after Deb went to New York. She came back, so she's joining the party. It's up to the rest of us what we do. And we all decided that we would affiliate with Workers' World Party at that point. That was in September of 1970. And we're very proud of that affiliation. And the party at that time didn't just draw on ourselves, but it drew in groups of youth, revolutionary youth collectives from all over the country, like ourselves. Because what was happening here was happening all over the country, where revolutionary elements who had been in part of SDS decided to orient to the working class struggle and formed collectives in many cities. And the party appreciated this movement and opened its doors up to this grouping. And the party actually tripled in size within about a one-year period by pulling in youth collectives like ours from all over the country. And they would meet with us, and basically, as long as we were willing to fight in the street, as long as we were in solidarity on the fight to defend the right of oppressed nations to self-determination and defended the socialist countries and defended socialism, the party said, well, we'll get the nuances over the next period. And the party opened its door. And it's a good lesson. It's a good lesson for what I think is going to happen in the next period. Because as a revolutionary party, we're going to be ready to open our doors to more and more. There are going to be people that are looking, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But a party, we're not about being a little creature. We don't want to be a small grouping. We want to be a big grouping that can really lead the working class. The party understood that, opened its arms up to this revolutionary youth current. Our first conferences were pretty wild. We had to learn a lot in terms of struggling against sexism, especially here and all over the country. We had a lot of internal, but we developed a party, and the party opened its doors with experienced leadership, had the confidence that it could bring in this kind of wild but revolutionary youth current into itself, opened its door to us, and we became part of and been part of the party, and are proud to say ever since. Now, when we joined Workers' World, it was a lot different period. You could still get jobs in the factories during that time. And a lot of us went into the factories, and a group of us went into auto, Deb went into steel, and we kind of gained our training as proletarian revolutionaries right on the shop floors and in the union struggles, the day-to-day union struggles that were going on during the period of the 70s. Of course, our party was always anti-imperialist at its core. Our first demonstration, as Bill Sachs pointed out, was a demonstration in solidarity with the Palestinian people. That was our first action in Detroit during Black September, when there was a massacre being carried on against the PLO. But we solidarized with every liberation movement and hit the streets and just talk about it. We demonstrated for Quebec liberation. That's what Tova was talking about Pierre Laporte, when the Quebec Liberation Front actually took the Prime Minister hostage, and we solidarized with them. We always solidarized with the Vietnamese people, and I remember when the Vietnamese were defeating the U.S. once and for all, we marched through the streets of Detroit chanting Dien Bien Phu in 72. Dien Bien Phu was the battle when the Vietnamese defeated the French imperialists, and we welcomed that defeat of U.S. imperialism. We were 100% for the Vietnamese. We demonstrated for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which has been an attack every day since its existence. I remember having a small demonstration on a freezing cold day, I think it was 10 degrees below zero, in front of Hudson. And the DPRK appreciated that action so much that it put it on the front page of the Pyongyang Times, and we were very proud of that action. And our party, we solidarized with the Sandinistas, with the FMLN, and then we continued to do it, of course, during the Iraq War. When the Iraq War first happened, and so much of the political movement was supporting sanctions, we distinguished ourselves with an anti-imperialist approach and defended the right of the Iraqi people and said sanctions are war. And then when Afghanistan happened, after the attack in 2001, when they were building Afghanistan, it was Workers' World that stepped into the void of the anti-war movement. And Workers' World built the tremendous answer demonstrations that took place. We built that. We built those demonstrations, and there were tremendous actions. And in Detroit, we formed an anti-imperialist coalition, Macawi, that operates to this day. And in fact, where the Social Democrats and the more pacifist groups have kind of fallen back, Macawi now really is the leading anti-war force in Detroit and really in the state of Michigan. We're very proud of that. In our earliest days, of course, our party was rooted in not just supporting anti-imperialism internationally, but in supporting the right of oppressed nations within the U.S. to self-determination and in fighting tooth and nail against racism here. And as Tova mentioned, we did a lot of work supporting the prisoner struggles, and whether with the Attic Rebellion, we opened our doors to the Prisoner Labor Union in Detroit, to our office. We were part of the movement to defeat Stress, which was a killer police squad that existed in Detroit, and joined with the tremendous demonstrations, and had one demonstration that when they had a fundraiser, when heroic black leaders, Hayward Brown and Brown, Bethune, and Boyd were black liberation fighters who took on these Stress cops and actually killed them when Stress was defending a dope house, which was what Stress was about, and killed these cops and wounded one of them. When they had a fundraiser for the wounded cop, we demonstrated outside that and said, no, we don't want to raise funds for the perpetrators of police violence. Let's raise funds for the perpetrators of the victims of the police attacks. And it was a militant action that directly confronted the cops in their own backyard. One of the early struggles against racism that we're very proud of was that Michigan was the first state where they attempted school busing for integration. And it was responded by the Ku Klux Klan in Michigan. It was in Pontiac, Michigan. It was the first state where they tried it. And the Klan actually blew up the school buses in Pontiac. They blew them up. And tried to intimidate the black community against this very basic demand for self-determination in the form of school integration. Well, we were the only group that went into Pontiac. One day on Friday that week, the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, Robert Miles, was speaking at Wayne State, and we found out about it. And we got there with a group of us, and we set up a demonstration outside where Miles was speaking. And of course, being the arrogant jerks that the Ku Klux Klan is, he tried to attack us. He thought we were going to just sit there and take it. He tried to attack our demonstration, and we beat the shit out of him on TV. We had a demonstration in Pontiac to defend the right of the black community to self-determination, and again, and to defend the right to have integrated schools. And we got there with about 20 of us, and then the Klan arrived with 20 of them. A fight broke out, but we had more people coming, so we knew we were going to win that fight. And we all heard shots. I'll never forget. We all heard shots. And we were thinking, oh my God, the Klan is getting ready to kill us. And the Klansmen are all thinking, man, them communists are getting ready to kill them. But what ended up happening was, as the fight turned to our advantage, the police intervened, and they arrested 8 of us, which became the Anti-Klan 8. While we were in the police cells in Pontiac, we actually had Ku Klux Klan is watching you cards slipped into our police cells. The Klansmen had their pictures, their mugshots taken with their arms around the cops, because that's who the Klan was. And this whole struggle in Pontiac was led by a front group called the National Action Group, which was a front for the Ku Klux Klan. Their lawyer was L. Brooks Patterson. That's how L. Brooks Patterson made his name, as a lawyer for the Ku Klux Klan. But we mobilized in defense of the Anti-Klan 8, and it was a neat action because I remember back in those days, because of the sexism that existed, they wouldn't bust women for fighting. So the men got busted for fighting, and the women for obscenity. So I remember I was in the factory, and I went to work the next day. There was a guy who turned to me and said, "Man, did you see the hippies fighting the Ku Klux Klan?" He said, "Them hippies weren't into peace and love. They had women in the front line." And we mobilized, and we passed out 40,000 flyers about this case. And it was a tremendous trial, and we had packed courtrooms with the Klan there and the community coming out. And the upshot of it was based on that struggle with our small group. You got to think, when we formed Workers' World, our oldest person was 21 years old. The rest of us were 20. We were all just a bunch of young people. Not just, we were probably a bunch of young revolutionaries. But that little struggle in Pontiac, the fact that we would step forward to defend the black community, out of the struggle, it empowered a group to form in Pontiac, within Pontiac, where parents got together, black and white together, and formed a group to advance education for all and to support the busing. And it ended up, busing was a big success in Pontiac. And the integration went on peacefully after the struggle, and in fact improved conditions for a number of years, so as all conditions are, they end up getting destroyed by the system. But really, it showed the power of just a small struggle of a small group that were willing to fight the power and to fight the Klan in doing that. And in fact, the women ended up overturning Michigan's obscenity law as unconstitutional based on that case. So it had long-term impact. Now, as I said, Detroit, when we came to Detroit still was a pretty bustling city. There were hundreds of thousands of auto workers, and the unions were strong. And particularly in Detroit, what made Detroit particularly unique was Detroit had always been a mecca for black workers who came to the South because of the auto industry, because you could get decent paying union jobs. And within the auto plants, there emerged a tremendous organization, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. And Detroit was the city where there was a synthesis of the black liberation struggle with the workers' struggle, because of the power that the black workers had in the plants. And we saw it, there was the Dodge Revolutionary Union Movement and the Eldon Avenue. There were revolutionary union movements led by Marxist-Leninists in all these plants, big caucuses that led a lot of walkouts and tremendous struggles. And it really was a high level of struggle because, again, it was uniting the power of black workers with the revolutionary consciousness of the black liberation movement. And it affected all the workers. I worked at that time in a plant that was out in the Michigan truck plant, a Ford plant. It was about 85% white. But in my plant, and it was a very, there was a lot of racism in the plant. My ears used to burn from hearing the racism. But we pulled together a caucus in that plant of black and white workers together. And you know what was interesting is the white workers, they looked at the workers in Detroit who were militant because they were led by revolutionaries, by union, and we actually elected a caucus. We elected 5 black committeemen out of 7 in that plant, where only about 10% of the workers were black, because the white workers understood that it was in their interest to vote for black workers and would fight. And they saw the black struggle, and they appreciated the power of the black struggle. And it was a good lesson for me about how sometimes this kind of racism that seems powering how the material conditions can lead to basic changes. Sometimes people will move in the struggle ahead of their consciousness based on the material need to do so. But by 1979, the bourgeoisie was ready to launch a restructuring. The technology had developed, and the capitalist class decided it was time to launch the kind of restructuring that we're still seeing going on, and we're still victimized by today, where the use of technology was there to eliminate literally millions of decent-paying union jobs. And technology became a weapon for the ruling class to use against the workers. And Detroit was one of the main cities which was a test for putting in what they call the deindustrialization through the scientific technological revolution. And our party saw this coming, and Comrade Sam Marcy wrote pamphlet after pamphlet. Sam was the founder of our party and the theoretical leader of our party, wrote many pamphlets discussing this reindustrialization, analyzing it, and developing strategic approaches how workers could challenge it. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. And we, in Detroit, I think one of the things that we concentrated on the years was how to bring this program to the workers. Sam raised what's called transitional demands, and it was an extension of a book that Trotsky wrote in the 1930s. And what is a transitional demand? It's a demand where you try to help the workers overcome the lack of anti-capitalist consciousness, to bring them to a struggle to challenge the system, but by doing it, by raising very basic, simple demands that in their essence challenge the fundamental nature of the system, that are a bridge of the consciousness. Because we all know in this country, consciousness is so much determined by the ruling class that controls the media and controls the schools. We were talking on the way in about the kind of crap that people learn in high school. It has nothing to do with reality. But that's what education is in this country. It's brainwashing. And the media is brainwashing. And we have to overcome it. And we can't just overcome it by just waving a red flag and calling for communism. We wish we could. But we have to overcome it by showing the workers, by raising demands that hit the very basic struggles of the workers and move them in a direction that challenges the system. And we did that, and Sam started raising transitional demands, both to raise within the union structure, but also in the community as well. And I think what the thing that we're most proud of in Detroit branch is because we are in a working class city, and a city that's been so hard hit by this crisis, by this constant deindustrialization, that I think our greatest strength as a branch has been applying the transitional program in a living way to the working class struggle. And we have a lot of pride in the struggles that we've been able to lead, concrete struggles that have moved people in that direction. So in 1979, when the industrialization, one of the first struggles we launched was the struggle against the oil companies. That back then there was what they called the oil shortage. There was a lot of publicity, and they jacked up oil prices dramatically. They doubled, gas prices doubled or tripled in a matter of about a year. And of course, the effect of that was to lead the country into a recession. And Sam wrote an article then raising the idea that why shouldn't the people take over the oil industry? And one of our first mass campaigns was a campaign for the people to take over the oil industry. And why shouldn't we? And we raised the idea that why shouldn't people vote on that? That oil is something under the ground. It's a basic resource. It belongs to all of us. Why should it be in the control of a handful of corporations? So we actually went out and petitioned for a referendum on the people taking over the oil industry. We went out, back then there were a lot of people in unemployment centers. We would go on, we got tens of thousands of signatures on a campaign for a takeover of the oil industry. And we actually got it on the ballot for a moment in Detroit. And then the oil companies found out about it, sent their lobbyists in. But we had a tremendous hearing here in Detroit. It was publicized all over the country. Where it was a hearing where the workers testified on how they should control the oil industry, not the corporation. That was one of our first mass campaigns. We followed that up. Of course, in 1980, Ronald Reagan got elected. And Ronald Reagan got elected on a program, you can see the poster there, of cutbacks, racism, and war. And Reagan, we shouldn't make any mistake, Reagan was a product of the fact that Jimmy Carter, previous to Reagan, had essentially capitulated to the military-industrial complex and had raised spending on the military dramatically and empowered the right wing in this country. And after they saw Carter do it, who was supposed to be a liberal, they said, well, why put Carter in? It's kind of what we're seeing these days. They said, let's put our boy in, which was Ronald Reagan. And when Ronald Reagan came in, most of the left was kind of paralyzed. They thought Ronald Reagan meant imminent fascism. It's kind of like a lot of how people are scared of the Tea Party today. But we viewed it differently. Our headline in our paper was, Reaganism will breed resistance. And we organized as an organization, the first national march against Reaganism was called the People's Anti-War Mobilization Demonstration. A tremendous march of 100,000 people in Washington. That while it was focused a lot on the U.S. war against El Salvador at the time, it brought in all the struggles. It united all the struggles against imperialism and as well, and raised the demand for money for jobs, not war, and linked the economic struggle to the fight against war, which now seems kind of routine, but at that time it was really the first march that really did that on a mass scale. It was a tremendous, tremendous demonstration, and it was right on the Pentagon. Following that march, Comrade Sam raised, well, look at, we had a lot of prestige. We built this big march when no one could do it. Say, well, look, we're not about leading just an anti-war movement. We need to lead the workers. And we said, let's take the esteem that we had grown and go to Detroit. And we organized what was called the All-People's Congress to overturn Reaganism. And the idea of the All-People's Congress was to build kind of a People's Congress, kind of modeled on the Soviets from the Bolshevik Party, to build a People's Congress to counter the Congress in Washington that was taking away everything. And we went in and we built the All-People's Congress. We had a lot of support from our national office, and we literally had 26 community meetings. We broke the city down into zip codes, and we went into every zip code with sound trucks. Every day we would have meetings, and we had 26 community meetings to this People's Congress at Cobo Hall. We organized 3 buses to the All-People's Congress, and we had a great concert. Gil Scott-Heron participated, and it was a tremendous event. It was a Congress of 3,000 people, a revolutionary event to challenge capitalism and to build. And off of that All-People's Congress, we built chapters of the All-People's Congress around the country. And one of the first struggles was, as Bill Sachs pointed out, our first struggle was in 1981-82. We were mired in a big recession. I think the unemployment rate in Michigan was 14%. And we exposed the fact there was mass hunger as a result of the recession. And we organized a campaign to liberate the warehouses where the agribusiness was spending $30 billion of food a year to stick food in warehouses to keep prices high. We said people have a right to that food. And we went to court to assert that right, but more importantly, we organized a mobilization of the masses. And we were looking for those warehouses, and they got so freaked out by that struggle that they started monthly food distribution. They started loading people up with food, and they lasted for 17 years. It won food distributions that went on for 17 years as a product of that struggle. This was an example of a transitional program. In other words, a program to take a basic issue, food, to say food is a right, but to point it in the direction of fighting capitalism and saying, rather than a capitalist system subsidizing the rich, the people have a right to seize that food and distribute it for their own needs. That's a transitional demand. We followed that up with a program in 1987. There was a big range of plant closings in Detroit. That's when GM announced its big plant closings, and it was going to eliminate something like 50,000 jobs in a period of a year. And we raised the demand at that time for a moratorium on plant closing. Comrade Sam wrote an article raising that why shouldn't there be a moratorium, a halt, an injunction on plant closing, because a job is a property right. When you work at a job for so many years, isn't that job your property? You own that. you've invested your whole life into the job. Why would some Wall Street billionaire who's never done a bit of work in his life make the decision on what happens to all that sweat equity that you built up? Right. We said, no, that job belongs to the workers, and we have a right to take whatever actions necessary to defend that property. Just like they try to take our home, we can defend our home. They take our job, that's our job, and we raised that. And we popularized this idea. We had one comrade at the Fleetwood plant. We went into Flint. We didn't even know anybody in Flint. We made some calls. We formed a committee. And we built a campaign called the Job is the Right campaign. We had the largest rally in Flint since the sit-down strike. And it was a campaign that went all over the country, just on the idea. See, it was important. That's what a transitional demand was, the power of a program. And the program got taken up. We were going to auto plants in Ohio. I remember Larry, we'd go into areas that we'd never heard of before when we were invited, because we were the only ones talking about challenging the right of these corporations, the right of the bosses to take away our jobs. And because we raised this challenge, it led to a big struggle all over the country. And it's interesting, while we didn't win, in essence, they were able to go ahead with the plant closing, but the lifetime benefits that auto workers got and won, and basically held on to until about the last contract, were a product of that struggle. They got so scared of this struggle waged by just a handful of us that they actually negotiated lifetime benefits for auto workers and actually negotiated a moratorium on plant closing into the 87 contract. It showed the power of an idea, and that's what we can do as revolutionaries. We can make up for our lack of resources. These are just some examples, but let me go on. I'll just give a few others. In 1990, when Governor Engler eliminated general assistance, as many of us remember here, general assistance was a meager benefit for single unemployed adults who ran out of unemployment. And Engler eliminated GA, and when they eliminated it, they called it a national social experiment. It was like a test for how far they can go to take away benefits from the people. And Welfare Rights Organization was out there fighting. They were fighting for the right to take over public housing. And we developed a campaign for a moratorium on eviction. And to say that because the GA was essentially a rent check, that people have a right to stay in their homes and to not be evicted until this income can be guaranteed. And literally, because of that, we organized, we were picking all these little hotels where single adults were living. Remember, we kept one, the Detroiter, we kept people living there for 2 years without having to pay anything. And when Edison tried to shut off the heat, we went down to Edison and took over Edison and forced them to keep it on. And we waited and we educated. We went out and didn't just talk about the campaign. We went out with leaflets and distributed them to 80,000 people. Each one had, here's what you do when the landlord tries to throw you out of your home, because of course they ignored the rights. And we would literally have people come up to, yeah, I used your leaflet and kept me in my home. And it was a tremendous struggle that we launched. It was another important struggle. Of course, most recently, we launched the struggle for a moratorium on foreclosures. When we saw the same pattern going on, we saw the subprime housing crisis and how millions of people are losing their homes now. And because of the criminal, fraudulent activity of the banks, we looked to the 30s, and we saw how in the 1930s, there were 25 states enacted moratoriums on plant closing. And in fact, the moratoriums were upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. And we raised this idea of a moratorium. But we always emphasized, when we framed a lot of these demands based on legal rights, the one premise that we always understood is that any law for the workers doesn't come from above, it comes from below. That any progressive legislation was first implemented by action. The civil rights movement wasn't implemented by Congress, it was implemented by the sit-ins conducted by civil rights organizers in the South. And they finally forced Congress to ratify those sit-ins. The unions were not one organization. We had an NLRB law. They were organized because the workers took over the plants. And they forced Congress then to ratify the union movement through the development of the Wagner Act. In the same way with the moratoriums. They weren't one in the 30s because we had an enlightened Supreme Court or legislatures. They were one because in every single neighborhood, when someone was getting thrown out of their home, there were unemployed councils moving them into their homes. And that's how we approach all these struggles in the mass arena. We didn't just do these things in the industrial area, too. We also had comrades who were in the public sector who played a tremendous role. And we hear a lot about privatization, but we launched the first big camp in 1979 when they first began kind of the process, because the corollary to the deindustrialization is the destruction of the public sector as well. And of course now we see this attack, and I think it's going to be the forefront of the attack. And in 1979, our comrades helped organize a sit-in at Detroit General Hospital to try to keep that hospital open. In 1991, we actually launched a major campaign to challenge the privatization of city jobs. We had a coalition, and we went to petition for a charter amendment. And in fact, the charter ended up passing a fairly strong law in Detroit that, of course, not utilized enough, but that defines the right, that people have a right, that the unions have a right to challenge the privatization of that job. And that was really our effort, too. And there are many other struggles I can go on with, but I think the thing I'm so proud of as a party is that our party, and Chris will talk about the election campaigns we waged as well, but I think what we're most proud of in Detroit was our party comes out of the working class struggle. The founders of Workers' World Party, Sam Marcy and Vince Copeland and Dottie Balin. Dottie Balin was one of the first women skilled electrical workers, was one of the first women to win a skilled trades job in the electrical industry. Vince Copeland was a steel worker who wrote tremendous books. So our party comes out of the working class struggle. And we understand that a revolutionary, if you're going to be serious about revolution, it isn't just about studying Marx, which we have to do. And it isn't just about defending the right of not just about fighting imperialism, which we have to do. And it isn't just about defending revolutions when they occur, which we have to do. But the most important task is to make the revolution alive for the workers. Because unless we have a revolution, we'll never have justice. And unless there's a revolution in the U.S., the rest of the world will never be free. As Che Guevara always said, we live in the belly of the beast. We have a special responsibility to the rest of the world. And when U.S. imperialism is defeated, when we have a revolution in the U.S., the whole world will be liberated because it's the U.S. that holds the of the work we've done in taking the program, the revolutionary program, that's based on our ideology of Marxism, Leninism, but to break it down in the most simple, basic ways for workers to grab on so we can lead the struggle, to lead the workers. And in the period to come, brothers and sisters, as we all know, we're entering a period that ain't going to get no better real quick. We have a Congress now that just got elected in. I mean, let's say objectively, when we look at the last election, we know what it was all about. They put in Obama, the bourgeoisie actually helped, and it was a great victory, Obama winning. But of course, the capitalist class put a lot of money behind Obama because when they bailed out the banks, they figured, gee, we better do something to cover our tracks a little bit. But when the struggle didn't develop, in the last election, the capitalist class essentially said, hey, we don't need to give nothing to the workers no more. So they poured hundreds of millions of dollars in. They created this little front, the Tea Party. But most importantly, they bought and paid for an election and put in a grouping of politicians whose ideology is give to the rich, to hell with the workers and the poor. We don't got to do nothing for the workers and the poor. That's the attitude that dominates. Yeah. And we know it. And it ain't going to get better in the next period. But on the other hand, we have the confidence that that kind of arrogance of the system is going to breed resistance. And it's going to open the door for revolutionaries like ourselves. We have a program. We're not afraid to challenge the system. We're not afraid to say, no, when a factory gets shut down, we have the right. That factory belongs to us. If the bosses don't want to run it, we'll run it. Or aren't willing or afraid to say, what right does a bank have to take anyone's home? We should be taking everything from the bank and putting the people in those homes and backing up that housing is a right. It's a fundamental human right. It's crazy you have to say it. I remember I was at a forum recently where we were talking about, yeah, we believe that heat is a right. And saying, isn't that some crap? We got to say heat is a right. We live in Michigan where it's freezing out. So we got to talk about heat. But we do have to talk about it because the utilities belong to the people. They need to belong to the people. The people are going to be open to our ideology. They're going to be open to our ideas. We want you to, and we're proud to say we got some young people coming in. We're a wonderful group in Lansing that's been carry out tremendous struggles. We're glad to see high school students that have been studying Marxism come into our classes. On a national level, we have a lot of young people coming into the party, just like we were. Because young people can make that struggle. We were young when we organized. We're still young at heart, but we need our young bodies out there too. And we're all going to come together. And we're so glad for everybody to be here. We're proud of our history. We're proud that our party is a party that's opened its doors to everyone, that's been in the forefront of defending lesbian gay rights, defending disability rights, One thing I remember always, one of the conferences I loved the most was when Comrade Sam Marcy talked about it. It was the first, one of the first writings on the transgender movement by one of our comrades, Leslie Feinberg. And Sam said, gee, every time I go to a party conference, I got to learn about a new form, a new word, a new form of oppression. He said, and ain't that what it's all about? Because people are oppressed on every level by anything, don't feel at home in a revolutionary party, what the hell are we fighting for? And then I'll never forget what Sam said, and that's what our party's about. We're a party that's open to all the workers, all the oppressed. We will fight against any form of oppression, whether it's sexism, whether it's LGBTQ oppression, whether it's, you name it. If anyone who's fighting the system, we're with you. Join our party. Build the struggle. Our day is going to be coming. We're going to see this revolution. We're going to see it in our lifetime, and we're going to fight to make it happen. Thank you so much.